everybody. Nice to have you all here. I'm going to call this meeting to order as it is 5:30, and we are privileged to meet on the Stalo unceded traditional territory of Chilliwack, Palallt, and Smath. The board also acknowledges the marginalization that many members of our community have experienced, whether as a result of race, sexual orientation, and gender identity, or other personal circumstances. The board is committed to providing a working and learning environment that recognizes the inherent dignity of all persons, that is inclusive of all, and that treats everyone with respect. All right, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. That's the old agenda, sorry. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Trustee Bondar, do I have a seconder? Trustee Moz, is there any discussion about the agenda? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as circulated? Thank you, that's unanimous. All right, can I get a motion to approve the minutes, please? Trustee Swanky, do I have a second? Trustee Westerby, did anyone notice any errors, omissions in the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as circulated? Thank you, that's unanimous. All right, so the first item on the agenda today is a presentation. This is a delegation presentation from Jillian Walsh, who is a registered dietitian, and the presentation will be about eating disorders in schools. During this presentation, because it is a virtual presentation, I have to turn off my mic. The superintendent's going to turn on his, and it's going to be over Zoom. So anyways, no one can, we can't use these right now. So just, we're going to watch the whole presentation and then we can do some questions or whatever at the end. But because of technical restraints, we're not going to be talking over these right now, and no one can, if I try to let you talk, it'll cut off his mic and then no one watching at home will be able to hear. So.
Welcome everyone. So I'd like to introduce Jillian Walsh, eating disorder care provider. So welcome Jillian, over to you, and you are now on the big screen.
Thank you, sir. So welcome folks. I can't see you, but I understand that you can see me. So I'm here. I was invited by a lovely parent to do a very quick presentation around eating disorders in schools in hopes of increasing awareness and giving tools to parents as well as teachers and support staff around the detection of eating disorders. So I will get going quickly. So as folks mentioned, I am a dietitian as well as a therapist. And I run an eating disorder treatment clinic for youth. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years. I've actually worked in British Columbia through Interior Health, and then I've also worked in Ontario and Newfoundland. So big picture, to talk about what an eating disorder is, this is one of the few mental health concerns that overlaps physical health concerns. So it involves the negative thoughts, behaviors towards food, weight, body shape, as well as body appearance. So we oftentimes will see that with youth as their bodies are changing and growing. And so of course, with any sort of mental health concern, these conditions and these behaviors can negatively impact their health, their emotions, as well as their ability to function in important areas of life. And so I do really stress the importance of this, of detecting eating disorders throughout the growth phases and stages of youth, because it can have such a paramount influence on their ability to grow. So a couple of things that we know based on the literature is eating disorder recovery takes on average 2 to 7 years. And so this stat tends to blow folks out of the water. It very much is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so the next piece with that is about 50% of individuals with eating disorders will fully recover from their illness. And so what happens with those other 50% is they find a level of quality of life throughout their lifespan, but there tends to be eating disorder behaviors, eating disorder thoughts that are the undercurrent right across their life. And so the third piece is early intervention, which of course is going to be in response to early detection, as well as early change, are going to be the key predictors of eating disorder recovery. And so I very much see early detection as a responsible that everyone can play, whether it's parents, teachers, support staff, friends, colleagues, coaches, trainers. We all have a role to play there. And then from there, interventions tend to be handed over to the family as well as healthcare providers. That early change actually falls onto the responsibility of the individual. So it'll be on the shoulders of the student and as well as their support persons, so parents and carers. A couple more statistics. Eating disorders were really impacted over the global pandemic, and unfortunately, youth especially. So a couple of stats that came out just over the past year or so. In Canada, the new cases of anorexia increased by 60% during the global pandemic. And hospitalizations from anorexia, which is one of the eating disorders, increased by 150%. And so these are really sad statistics to see, very much a reflection of what we see clinically, which is a very large increase in the presentation of eating disorders. The other piece is the median age, the average age of onset has decreased significantly. So what I used to see clinically was an average age of maybe 14, 15. I'm now seeing folks as young as 9, 10, 11. And the average age of our clinic, in terms of who we work with, tends to be around 12 and 14. And so that's a really tricky thing in terms of seeing how early it's presenting, because it gives them, unfortunately, a longer opportunity to do a lot of damage to their physical body due to the malnutrition. And so it's just one of those things to keep in mind. Age, it's not something that shows up in adolescents or teens anymore. It's very much showing up as young as grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. The last piece is eating disorders very much can be linked to dieting. And so in 2018, about 70% of teen girls in Canada had dieted. So really the majority of folks that you could be seeing in your schools, those that do diet may be up to a 92% more likely, or 92% increased risk to develop an eating disorder. So basically, the take-home message there is that dieting is going to be a risk factor for the development of an eating disorder. And then there's also a correlation between poor body image or negative body image to the development of an eating disorder in adolescents. So folks, there's one tool I want to leave you with. This is the Ottawa Disordered Eating Screen for Youth. And it's 2 questions. It can be asked by anyone. You do not have to be a clinician to ask these questions. A lot of school counselors, teachers, parents can use this tool. And so it is 2 questions. It takes about 30 seconds. If we get 2 yeses, then that indicates a positive screen for an eating disorder. That's not an eating disorder diagnosis. It simply is a prompt to notify either a parent or carer and seek additional support, usually from their GP, family physician, nurse practitioner, that sort of thing. And so in terms of how schools can help, it is very helpful to have training for teachers, counselors, as well as admin staff around the prevention and detection of eating disorders. And so what I found is that there's usually about a minimum of 4 hours needed to really get through with everything that's required, especially when it comes to reframing some of the curriculum. And so we know some of the curriculum is tricky around language with good foods, bad foods, healthy foods, unhealthy foods, and just a little bit of a shift in language can very much help the prevention of eating disorders. Another piece can be organizing education sessions or workshops for parents and carers. And so we don't need as much time there. They tend to know their child best. They tend to already have a bit of a spidey sense that something may be going on. And so I usually recommend about an hour and a half, again, targeting prevention and detection. And I do think that everyone in a school setting can use that initial screening via the ODESY. But most folks are deferring to the school counselor to use that tool simply because of the setting and that sense of rapport and safety that may help youth disclose any concerns that they're having. So folks, I do want to turn this over to you so that we can answer any questions that might come up. I also recognize, I hope somebody has a timer. I don't know where I am in the 10 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing, and then if there's any questions that come through, I'm happy to answer them.
Superintendent, I just need to ask so now you can hear us, right? Can you hear me? Jillian?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure this whole system is working now. Okay, perfect. Now that you're not presenting anymore, we can use our normal system. Okay, awesome. Trustees, does anyone have any questions? Yes, Trustee Bonder.
Thanks, Jillian, for that presentation. That was really interesting and alarming, frankly, to see, especially those statistics with the 60% increase, the 150% increase in hospitalizations. Do you have any sense for whether these cases are more acute having come from the pandemic, or are we seeing, a consequent sort of decrease now because we've sort of seen a lot of that happen from the pandemic? I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
I think think I'm following, and I'll try my best to answer it. So in terms of what we're seeing with return to school in person, you might think that the incidence will go down, but what we're hearing clinically, at least on the front line, is that a lot of these youth are struggling more. So they're returning to eating socially, eating in a cafeteria, eating away from their main support. So of course, with the pandemic, a lot of youth were home eating with their families. Parents had a closer eye on their youth to see what sort of behaviors were sneaking in, and to be honest, a lot less behaviors could occur under their own roof. So when we were in that state of significant isolation, what ended up happening is parents were detecting it a lot faster because they were seeing it so quickly, and they were also able to provide support quickly because they were home, they were all in the home environment. So what I've been hearing is that going back to school has actually been more difficult than we would have thought, and it has not necessarily looked like a decrease in the incidence of eating disorders, say in the past year with the return to school
Thank you.
in person.
Thank you. I do have a little follow-up to that, which is there anything that sort of can be recommended? Do you recommend young people eat together with a purpose of actually getting through their lunches or something like that? Any sort of just sort of really easy things that could be done, potentially?
Absolutely. So that's a double-edged sword. So what I've seen sometimes is youth can be very supportive of each other. They can encourage basically the consumption of their lunches and their snacks. I've also seen the other side of the coin where there can become a little bit of competition between, the desire to lose weight or the desire to look a certain way, conform to social, norms. And so it can go either way. And to be honest, clinically, I tend to see it go the negative way more often than the positive way.
Thank you.
First, thank you so much for the presentation. In my mind, a lot of what I'm hearing is this further reflection on the impact on mental health as a hangover of COVID that we're still grappling with. My question actually is through the chair to staff. I'm wondering, there were two questions about indicators of eating disorders, and I'm wondering if either of these are tracked in our EDI, our YDI, or MDI, not to necessarily track prevalence of eating disorders, but even to understand the prevalence of indications of eating disorders in the district, because that would be local data.
I think that's a really good question. I think I'm not sure exactly where it's tracked, but I think the link to mental health, and I'm kind of going through my mind the questions, and I can't see where it is, but I think that would be something we could definitely look into.
Trustees, do we have any other questions? Trustee Reed.
Sorry. I was just wondering, what is the current pathway in this? I'm not sure who can answer this question best, but what is the current pathway if a teacher or staff member detects an eating disorder or potential eating disorder? Is that something that goes through the school resources, or do we refer to like Chilliwack Youth Health Center, those sorts of things?
Maybe staff could answer that question.
Thanks, Margaret. So yeah, we'd go through teacher, counselor, school-based team, sometimes conversations with parents. We do have mental health literacy in the classroom, so that was initiated, Dave, about 5 years ago. Yeah. We started that training, and so that is implemented in our classrooms. So there is wraparounds for those cases that are a little bit more complex. Then we would use those outside referrals.
I just had one question. So I know that I'm actually pretty passionately against diet culture. It's one of the things I care about. So I was just wondering if you can speak at all. You don't have a lot of time left, but some people don't understand that sometimes this focus on healthy eating can lead to eating disorders because all food is food, and you can have a treat now and then, it's fine. This sort of idea that there are good foods and bad foods can really lead to disordered eating, and I wonder how we navigate that in schools, because we do talk about nutrition and stuff, but at the same time, you don't want to create that food phobia, right?
What sort of ideas have been perpetuated. And so when we talk about moralizing food, giving it that good label versus the bad label, or junk versus clean, healthy versus unhealthy, it's tricky, because what you're saying is that there's some sort of moral value attached to that type of food. And I love what you said. What we promote as well is that food is food, right? Food is going to provide some sort of nourishment. Some is going to be more nourishing than others, of course. But if we can take out that moral value and just kind of talk about food as the components of food, and talk about how it connects back to social connection, right? Like, food is the center of a lot of social events, and it does bring folks together. And so talking about the positive impact of some of those things, it shifts the focus. And I think youth need to be hearing that somewhere, because they're not hearing it most places. There is a lot of diet culture within the homes. I mean, the generation that are in the parenting carers space, there was a lot of diet culture perpetuated within that generation. So a lot of this starts at home, not on purpose, but of course just intrinsic beliefs around food. And then the next piece is that social media is really, really tough, in the sense of perpetuating the diet culture, perpetuating the desire to look a certain way and conform to societal norms. And so the social media piece is really, really tricky, because there's also subcultures of eating disorder, so pro-eating disorder accounts. And a lot of youth are consuming that sort of content. It's really, really tricky, because what you have is folks with mental health concerns putting out and publishing content that youth are very much taking as truth. They're taking it as valid, and that critical thinking skill set is not quite developed yet. So they very much say, if this has been viewed 1 million times, or if this has been liked 500,000 times, it must be true. And so a lot of youth that we see bring in some of these distorted food beliefs that they've picked up elsewhere. Oftentimes social media, sometimes at home, but definitely tricky.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. And we have, the superintendent has your email address, right, if we want to follow up with you. Yes, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Thank you. Back onto the normal. All right. Okay. All right, everybody. So we're now on to item 3, public participation. So this is comments or questions concerning items on the agenda. So anyone from the public gallery who would like to come up and make comments or questions about the agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any. There is the other opportunity at the end of the agenda for you to ask any questions. Okay, so we will be moving on then to action items. So the first item on the agenda in action today is 4.1, 2022-2023 amended annual budget. So this is going to be passed over to the Secretary Treasurer, and I do want to take this opportunity to introduce our new Secretary Treasurer to the board, well, not to the board because we've met, to the public. So as you know, for many years we did have Secretary Treasurer Sykos, and he is retired. So we now have Dr. Simone Sangster, and we're very privileged to have her. She has an extensive background in education, working in the education sector, and so we're really excited to have her on our team.
Thank you.
So,
Is this on?
yeah.
All right. I'm very excited to be on the team. Thank you for the welcome. I'm actually very excited to have Mark on my team, who's actually going to be presenting tonight. He knows more about the amended budget than I do, and did a fabulous presentation the other night to Budget Committee. And I think we're going to see another summary. The one thing I will say, and maybe should I talk to that slide that we've got on the, we've got, I think about 2 slides in. There's a slide on terms of reference for the Budget Committee. Did we keep that? We kept that in, right? So you'll see just down the bottom of that page, 2.2 and 2.3, the terms of reference for the committee were to review the preliminary budget and basically, in a way, pre-digest it before it comes to the board. And you'll see a couple of, for those of you especially who were there last Thursday night, you'll see that we've added a couple of slides because of some of the great conversation and questions that we had. And I think that'll help inform the conversation tonight. So I think without further ado, I turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Treasurer, and apologies, Assistant Secretary Treasurer, for not knowing that you were the one doing this presentation. Press your button, whichever you're doing, make sure to press whichever button you're. I think, well, we're doing this on the screen anyways, but I think the camera would still be pointing at the thing, but you're not on the screen anyway, so it's fine.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. And as our Secretary Treasurer said, we had a good discussion on Thursday night with our Budget Advisory Committee. Lots of great questions and information being shared. And so we just wanted to acknowledge that, and bringing the terms of reference here as a reminder of the work that that committee does is good, and we really appreciate their coming alongside the work that we do. So just now moving to our timelines. Most of you are familiar with this slide. And so it's just a good reminder of where we are in the process. So we've been working since our September 30th student count to put together the amended budget, which helps us finish off the remainder of this school year. So we're here now presenting it to the board tonight for the first reading, and then most likely we'll be bringing it back to the next board meeting for the second and third readings. At the same time, you can see the bottom line there. We're already working on next year's preliminary budgets, doing enrollment forecasts and thinking how that's going to affect staffing, looking at the impact of inflation on our operations, because that has been more significant this year than it has in the past 7 or 8 years that I've been with the district. So lots of moving parts there. So we're busy working on that and preparing for our public budget presentation in the springtime. Okay, moving on. So as I said, we've met on Thursday with the Budget Advisory Committee to give them the presentation for what's changed in the preliminary budget to the amended budget, and we're bringing it tonight for the first reading. In between this board meeting and the board meeting coming up on February 7th, we will have a board learning session where the board has opportunity to ask us more in-depth questions should there be any questions from what they see tonight. Obviously, we'll take questions tonight as we go along as well. And then, of course, we have this due at the ministry at the end of February, which shouldn't be an issue for us. So this slide is an excerpt from the actual budget template that we submit to the ministry. And why we pull this one out is because this is what the board motion is based on. And I think in the first time in the history of Chilliwack School District, we're actually reporting expenditures of over $200 million, which is hard to believe that we've hit that milestone. But here we are. So $200 million board motion to pass tonight. Majority of that is made up of our operating expenses of $164 million, and then another $19 million of special purpose funding, which I'll explain what that is near the end of the presentation, and then $12 million for capital expenditures, which relate to the depreciation of our existing building and some annual facilities work that we do. And then the last component is another $5.5 million, which the majority is our capital cost sharing, still paying for our share of STTOS and our Vetter Elementary building addition for that total of $201 million. So just so you know what you're actually voting on tonight. So. Okay, so this is, as promised, this is some of the comments and questions that came from the Budget Advisory Committee that we wanted to highlight. These are things you should be looking for as we present the assumptions, of the changes, because this is what sort of eyebrows raised or questions that maybe wasn't so apparent when we presented the material before. So first notable thing is that our regular enrollment was actually 82 FTE less than our preliminary projections, but at the same time we had 70 FTE more of our special needs enrollment, and you'll see that how that affected our funding from the ministry and our staffing. And then the next big one that you'll see throughout the presentation is that we have funding for our wage and labor settlements from all our employee groups, even though I know one of the employee groups has not settled yet, but it's in there and we need to put that in there in anticipation of the settlement happening, because otherwise we're going to be talking about large variances at the end of the year. Another big thing that is permeating is our, we got a special grant to pay for our district principle of early learning. This is something we had in our strategic plan and we were aiming towards, and so it was quite timely that this grant became available, and you'll see how that plays out in other funding we've gotten with our early learning and childcare funding. Another component that came out that I think I gloss over because I'm so used to it is the fact that schools in our targeted funding or Indigenous Ed funding, often there's a surplus or carry forward of money that from things that they anticipated spending couldn't spend. This really hit hard now because of the last 2 years of COVID. There just hasn't been the opportunity to spend. Either programs have been shut down or they're just supply chain issues, which has caused delays. You know, we had good intentions of spending money on equipment, and just the supply chain pipeline just is backlogged. So that money has come back into our budget this year in the hopes that we'll be able to spend it down. So you'll see that as a input this year. And of course, I've already talked about the capital cost sharing. Someone might think, well, didn't we finish the buildings? You know, why haven't we paid the bills? It's just a timing issue of when the bills have all come up. So of course that didn't get wrapped up on June 30th. So that's back in the budget this year, if anybody's wondering. So just a few highlights. I think we'll probably continue doing this going forward. I think this is a good way to connect the work of the Budget Advisory Committee to the board as a whole. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm just going to launch right into the different components that we're used to. So as a reminder, what we're doing here, the amended budget isn't a bunch of new information. It's a tweaking of what we had already built in our preliminary budget when we did the projections and the assumptions in the spring. So now it's just truing up, or, you know, a reality check of what we can actually get done this year. And so you see our ministry funding for enrollment is up, and that's primarily because our special needs are more heavily weighted than the money that we potentially lost from having fewer of the regular enrolling students. And then there's the large chunk of labor settlement funding in there of $5 million. I'm not going to go through every line item here. The other big one to note is the international students. With COVID restrictions easing, a lot more countries are, you know, willing to entertain sending kids again. You know, there's more interest in looking for that overseas experience. So we see that as an uptick from what we projected. And then probably the biggest one to note is our investment income, up $700,000. And we all know interest rates are going up, which in a lot of people's budgets might be a bad thing. But in our case, where we have cash on hand or cash in the bank, it's a positive, and we're earning a lot more interest. That number used to be so negligible when we were earning 0.5% interest. So it's nice in this year, and you'll see why it's nice that we're getting that shot in the arm. So all told, about $6.8 million of an additional revenue from what we had in our preliminary budget. Moving on, so first of all, looking at our expenses for wages and benefits, which are our largest component. So that extra revenue quickly gets eaten up by our wages and benefits. I have to admit that we had a bit of an error that we found in our preliminary budget where we used, there was a misunderstanding whether we were using FTE or headcount when we were doing student to teacher staffing. So effectively, we had more staffing in there than we probably should have at the time. So without pulling it back, that's an extra cost that we needed to put in there now. Of course, with our increase enrollment with special needs students. We have an increase in our EA wages and benefits. Some of the staffing changes, that's where our district principal of early learning, we get a decrease there because now we don't need to support that through our operating fund anymore, so we get relief on that. We've had some staff vacancies, so where we've budgeted to have this staff in there, and we haven't found a replacement or they're on leave, we can take that money out because we know we're not going to spend that. One other thing to note is that some of our specialty positions, like our speech language pathologists and our education psychologists, we've had a really hard time replacing those, and we've got through job postings and the posting process, and we've had to take the hard decision to outsource some of those positions on a temporary basis. So they were budgeted in there, of course, with our preliminary budget. We're holding those positions, hoping that one day we can refill them with staffing. But for now, they're, from a wages perspective, they're a savings, effectively. But you'll see them come back in because we have to spend it on contract services on the other page. So now, if you recall, if you remember to our revenue side with our wages and collective agreement increases, we were funded by about $5.1 million. Here, the actual cost is 5.7, so we weren't fully funded, which is a little unfortunate for our district. The reason being is the province looks at the average teacher cost district by district, and if your average teacher cost looks less than the provincial average, they deem that you don't need as much of the base funding, and so they claw it back a little bit. So it's sort of counterintuitive, but it's like, so okay, so we end up having to pay more. We're required to find that money somewhere else just to pay for our staffing because we don't measure up against the province. So that's a bit of an unfortunate one. We only really find that out in December. It's sort of, there's no way to really gauge it. We could try and be as conservative as possible, but it's sometimes, some years we win and we're like, yay, you know, we're more, and we get that shot in the arm because then they'll fund us more. But in this case, they didn't fund us as much as, you know, we needed. School budgets, you see an increase there. This is schools using some of their extra money that they've generated for offering extra courses to buy staffing. So that in effect is offering more, you know, course offerings or more subject blocks. And so we've seen a real uptick in that this year over prior years, to a tune of $750,000, I guess. And then probably the last one I'd talk about is the staff replacement cost. So just looking at the ongoing replacement, and of course it's hard to know what your replacement budget should be, because you don't know, you know, is it going to be a bad flu season, you know, COVID, and just looking at the trends in the trajectory, we thought it prudent to put in another $250,000 into the budget, you know, which may or may not come to pass, but this is, you know, our modeling says that we should. So close to $7 million increase in the wages and benefits. Moving on to supplies. We have close to $1 million increase here. So from the last slide, I said schools are using some of their supplies funding to purchase teachers. So you see that their supplies funding is coming down by $500,000. And then they've turned around and used some of their prior year surplus to help pay for that. So the $400,000 goes back in. And then you also see the Indigenous funding increasing from their prior years to try and, you know, ramp up their programs and their spending this year from what they had left over. There's a few one-time project costs which aren't too significant. We were hoping to do a few minor tweaks to this building, so we've had to try and find some money for it. So we put that in there. And then you see there your SLP and psych ed service contracts at about $300,000. So that's an outlay we have to spend. So, and then there's some inflationary pressures that we're feeling. Probably the largest one to talk about is our fueling for our buses. We've had to add $100,000, just the nature of fuel going up. So, you know, thankfully we're not still at $2.25 a liter, but it's still significant and affecting our budget. So, and that's the supplies. So the last thing to talk about before we summarize it all together is our capital expenditures. So these are expenditures we make based on a maintenance schedule and a replacement schedule, and it's prudent for us to keep to that. Otherwise, if we keep our vehicles 11, 12 years or whatever, after the best before date, that the maintenance costs are just kind of ridiculous, and just the safety issues start creeping in. So these are scheduled things. These are things we don't want to, scrimp on to say, oh, well, it doesn't look like we're going to have enough money to meet these. You can see at one point we already have done away with the 1.5 ton truck, and I'm not sure if you know why we deferred that, or.
It was deferred, yes, as part of a cost-saving measure from previous budget. Yeah.
But it's not something we like to go to. No. And you see, the first 4 items up there, they do say they're deferred, and that wasn't because we were purposely doing that. That comes back to the supply chain issues, and most people know that it's been hard to get new vehicles purchased, in a timely manner. So we've been patiently waiting for these things. So all told, we're looking at just over $500,000 in capital expenditures, which is the usual ask every year. And so that will add to our budget. And I think it's the next slide that I'll show you how it all is put together. So this is a little bit of a different format than just showing the revenues and wages and salaries and supplies, but it puts it all together. And before I go into just some of the details, I'll show you, at the preliminary budget, we did actually have a balanced budget. That $800,000 deficit on the right was covered off by the surpluses we anticipated in our Indigenous ed and our schools. So effectively, that was a balanced budget that we brought. Now through all these changes, we're bringing a budget with a $560,000 deficit. And so the largest things here are the enrollment. We netted a $1 million deficit, and that was largely due to the error in the staffing. The wages, the labor settlement funding, basically we lost out in about $600,000 in what we were hoping for. The other revenue, the $500,000, is the net of all the investment income, so that helps offset some of the losses. And then I've already talked about the staffing changes, and I think that's about it. School budgets. So school budgets, they've increased quite a bit, but you see that they're putting $900,000 of their own surplus against that if you look way down at the bottom. So. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at mine. Yeah, sorry, there you go. Okay, so all told, we had a $2.1 million deficit before we take into account the fact that Indigenous education and the schools are contributing their surplus to help pay for some of those expenses. So the district is still on the hook for $559,000 of money that they have to take from their reserves. And speaking of reserves, we'll go to the reserve summary. So, and I'm just going to get my notes for this because I had some specific things to say about it. Okay. So at the end of June, we had an unrestricted surplus of $3.6 million. So taking, $560,000 plus another $73,000, which was money that we needed for paying for one of our deferred vehicles, still leaves us with $3 million. So in and of itself, that sounds okay. I mean, in my mind, I guess I'm personalizing this, but I'm sure everybody would be okay with a $3 million cushion. Having said that, though, we need to inform you of Board Policy 611, accumulated operating surplus, which says the board will attempt to maintain a contingency reserve of 3.5% of annual operating expenses. So if you do the math on that, right now we're only at a 1.87%. So we really need close to $5 or $6 million. At the same time, we've just turned around and given out $5 million for a capital cost sharing. So if you look back in 2020 or 2021 especially, we would have been fine meeting this obligation. So I think further discussion is warranted by this because, I think there's a tension here where board policy says there's a comfortable reserve level of 3.5%. At the same time, we've had discussions around this table that when we go into new capital projects and building projects, there could potentially be an obligation from our district to turn around and give up some of those reserves to pay a portion of our new build. So, I'm not suggesting that we, limit our reserves, but I think we have to have further discussion and maybe even go back to this policy and look, is this doing the job it's supposed to be doing, or do we need to make any modifications? So that's for further discussion down the road, but just giving you a heads up about that. So that's primarily it for the operating fund, which is the bulk of what we have to talk about. And so just to round out our presentation, I'm going to speak a little bit about our special purpose fund and our capital funds. Special purpose funds are those funds, just to remind you, that have a specific target or a specific use for those funds, just like we just explained, like the early learning is just for early learning. If there's surplus in that, we can't go and roll it into our operating funds. So then our capital funds, we run all our costs of the buildings, so whatever they are, $50-60 million through the capital funds. You don't really see that in the budgeting so much. What you do see is a lot of the write-downs or the depreciation, and then anything we pay from a local perspective, like our share of the buildings and our local equipment that we've just presented. So I'll just quickly, I have 2 more slides just to show you. So first of all is the special purpose, and what I'm showing you here is just the change in the funding. A lot of this isn't new money, it's just that money wasn't announced on the preliminary budget. So for instance, the mental health initiatives we've got for a number of years now, we continue getting base funding of $51,000 of that. I believe there was a carry forward from last year, so there's actually more funding there for mental health initiatives, which we're working on. The new one, of course, is the family affordability. That wasn't there last year. That wasn't around to the preliminary, so that's $1.5 million. And I believe we'll be bringing an update on that at the next board meeting. And then probably the other big change is the classroom enhancement fund. When we look back at a restored language, once we have our students all placed in September, we kind of know the class size and composition, and we can make adjustments for staffing for that based on the restored language. And so there's a small uptick of $676,000 for that fund. And I guess maybe I should just quickly point out the early learnings funds looks like it doubled from 273 to 558, and that is largely due to the funding for the staff member, but having that dedicated staff member who can totally focus on early learning has allowed her to go after new funding that's out there, because the ministry and other avenues are really advocating for childcare and early learning. So there's a lot of availability of money, and we've seen a good intake in that from the work of that principal. So it's been really good to see. So, just moving on quickly, this is the funnest slide. But I had to do for the accountants. So just if you're going through line by line looking at the budget template, we had a net increase in amortization expense of $100,000, and what that just means is the way the ministry wanted us to write down our buildings, and I think it was the timing of when we got into our new buildings and opened our buildings. They were basically already depreciating. They're already losing value on the books. So we have to show that. We have to show that adjustment. And then, of course, our capital cost sharing. When we made the preliminary budget, we assumed we would pay all our bills by the end of June. That didn't happen, so we just have to show that we've brought it back in and we're paying it this year. And then there's a little bit of tweak to the capital expenditures based on the the costs of those items just increased by $15,000. So just as a way of completeness to show how we went from $500,000 to $5.5 million in our capital fund. And I think that's everything. We just have the budget template, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but if any trustee has any questions on that or anything else, we're happy to take them. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, trustees, are there any questions? Trustee Bondar.
Thank you, Mark. That was a really awesome presentation, and I liked the slides quite a bit. They were just really easy to follow, and I appreciate that. I have a couple of questions. Every time the fuel costs come up, the first thing that comes up in my mind is, have we ever done any kind of feasibility study looking at what it could potentially look like if we went electrical, or if we were to even consider making our bus fleet electrical? I know we got the 3 individual vans last year. Is that an option? Yes.
Yeah, we continually look at different, like electrification. There is some avenues through ministry. There is some avenues through the government. Right now, the cost of an electric bus is still considerably more than most of our fleet is diesel. So there still is a large cost. What we're working on right now is the infrastructure. So I believe there will be a time that the fleet does change to an electrification, but we have to have the services in place. We have to have the infrastructure in place, and that is fairly costly. So that is the studies we're working on right now, is those feasibility studies to have the ability to charge all of these buses. The other thing that's happening is, I've been in this industry for quite a while. I've been the first guy with propane. I've been the first fellow with natural gas. And there's always challenges that come up being first, and costs that come up, and inconveniences. So we're working with other districts that have gone to the electric bus. They do work, but definitely there's challenges happening. So by us taking a very planned step as we go through this, it's saving us some dollars, and it is saving us some challenges. So we're continuing to work on it, though.
Do we have any other questions? I guess I have one. So we're looking at a $500 deficit this year that we have the money to pay for electrically. I'm wondering if you're feeling that is a structural deficit that we're going to have to deal with next year. And if it is a structural deficit, I have a request. I've made it before, but I'm beseeching you that when we're looking at the budget for next year, that it can be broken down into the expenses that we have no choice in, that we have to spend, versus the ones that decisions have been made. Because I have been a trustee now for over 4 years. I'm very confident I've always passed budgets that are balanced, that make sense, but I am not always confident that the same decisions would have been made had I been able to really understand where the choices were made. So that's a comment. But my first part about the structural deficit, if we are going to have to start making cuts, I want to know that I'm making the right cuts, is basically what I'm saying. So I really hope that happens. But also, do we even need to, or are we hopeful that next year things will be all rosy and we won't have to do that?
Yeah, no, and I neglected to mention that this isn't sustainable. We don't want to sit at a $500,000 deficit. So we'll be looking at, what we can do. I don't think, it's dire, but yeah, definitely we'll be looking at tightening up our processes so we can figure this out. And and we're mindful of your comments that you've made a few times before, that and we're with having a new secretary treasurer, we're having to unpack the budget and doing a lot of ground up work. So whether you asked or not, we'd probably be looking at doing things differently. So there you go.
Thank you so much. Trustee Swanky, I've seen your hand hovering. Feel free to press the button. Trustee Bonder has already asked a question though, so it's your turn if you'd like.
Sure, I have a couple. We'll start with the first. Just going back to the special purpose funding that's funding currently the principal of District Early Years Principal is the title, sorry. I'm wondering if that's just funding for this year, or if we're going to see that funded going forward for a couple of years.
as far as I know, that's sustainable funding. Yeah, yeah. 3 years? Okay.
That's the starting point.
I had a question about, I noticed that there was a sort of an underestimate in our normal, sort of just general registrations, yet we had 70 extra full-time equivalents for special needs students. Have we done any work to unpack why that is the case? It strikes me as odd, or did I misinterpret that? Oh,
Sorry, are you asking why we have such an uptick in special?
yes.
I don't know if one of you wanted to take that one?
I think the question is around like how are we accounting for it? So I think when we're looking at the grant, there's the core funding for all students, and then we are looking at the special ed grant for additional funds for kids with A to H categories. And I think, and I'm looking to the accounting side, I think that's where you're seeing the increase. So when there's an increase on the special ed grant side, but overall enrollment has dropped. Or less than projected, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think that gets it.
The way I interpreted your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is why are there 70 more students? Are there actually 70 more students with special needs, or do we do a better job counting them than before?
No, so we have had a growing, so we could, over a number of years, we're seeing an increase in special ed category students, yeah. Students with special ed categories.
Okay, and that was 70 alone last year.
70 more.
More.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Trustee Moss.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do a little layman's, take a few steps back. So we budgeted for 184. Our amended budget is 201 million. The difference is 17 million. We lost 82 students, but we gained 70 special needs students. Not Q, by the way, segue to my motion. And so I come to a difference of $17 million, a discrepancy of $17 million. But then I saw the special purpose funds was 18 million. Have I summarized all of that properly or not? I'm all over the place. Yes, no, that's fine. No, then that's why I said I'm going to give you my layman's interpretation on this, and please correct me and show me the progression on it, because I kind of thought with the going up 70 special needs students, and that's not the first time I think that's happened. I seem to recall that from the last budget, so it just kind of seems interesting.
I might not be able to answer your question in full, but we'll make an attempt. I think when you're looking at the 17 million, you're using the whole capital special purpose. You're combining the whole thing. I think what you want to do is stick to your operating, and then go back to. You just go down 2 slides. No, down. Sorry, up the. Yeah, one more. Or one more after this, sorry. Yeah, so basically, so you can see, because I think you're looking at this document, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
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 And the line, and this just reports expenditures, how much, the board is expected to approve for expenditures. And on the operating side, we go from 156 million to 164 million, so about a $8 million increase. And you can see that in the middle column there, how you went from 156 to 164.
Okay.
But then offset with that, we also increased revenue by $7 million. So we're down to only $1 million change.
Okay.
And then we have some changes in our capital and some of the contributions from the special or school surplus and Indigenous funding. So really, this is where you want to focus your questions and then start drilling in and go, does it make sense, you know? So probably just, yeah, I mean, happy to talk about changes in special purpose and capital, but that sort of convolutes probably what you're trying to get answered.
Okay, no, thank you for that, because, you know, when you bring us these presentations, and I'm sure everybody is like, what was that middle part again? It's right, because it's a lot to digest. So if I just look at numbers and I subtract and, yeah, it's, I thank you for all of the work that you did on this, because, without your diligence, we'd be in a bad way, but, okay, thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, I guess just for the benefit of all of the new trustees, who might not actually have seen the budget, obviously, as many times as some of us have. So special purpose funding doesn't really affect the budget, because that is like, we get money for a specific thing and then immediately spend it on that specific thing. So it doesn't matter really if that goes up and down, because we don't have a choice. It comes in, it's for a specific thing, we just spend it out. Whereas the operating budget is, it can go up, it can go down based on enrollment, and then that's all the stuff we're spending all the time. So special purpose funding can be lots and lots of money, but we don't have control over it in the same way we have. Is that correct? Okay.
And can I just jump in for a second here? There's a slide right at the very beginning, it's page 18. So, Trustee Moores, I think this is where you were getting your 17 million, right? Right here. And what you'll notice here is it's titled Amended Annual Budget Revenue and Expense, but all this is expense. This is only, and what Mark has been, you know, carefully showing you is, yes, there are some more expenses, but there's more revenues and we're okay. There's not a $17 million hole. Here, this is just showing the expenses, because the way school districts and many public organisations work is the board says, okay, we're happy, you can spend this much money. The board doesn't actually have that much control over the revenue side, right? But you do have control over the expenditure side. So that's why we put this sheet up, and I think that's where your question came from. Okay.
Thank you.
No. Trustee Westerby?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you both for all your work on this. I completely appreciate the amount of time you've spent on it, and also the committee. My only concern is just around policy 611, as you highlighted. The language does say that we need to attempt to keep the surplus, and we are quite below. And by the sounds of it, this is a trend. And I also am concerned that we're using the Indigenous program surplus to cover some of our expenses. So I guess my question is, how does 611 apply here? Does it give us some sort of mandate to like send this back? It's not going to work. Or yeah, so I guess that's my question.
Okay, I'll just to clarify. So yeah, so and again, this is probably me bringing my personal bent in here. In regards to the Indigenous funding, we got to be careful here, because the ministry wants us to run it through our operating fund. So, but for all intents and purposes, you could treat it as its own private special purpose fund, meaning we're not allowed to actually use that money for non-Indigenous activity, let's say. So really, it's like we get the money for, targeted Indigenous education activities, and we have to spend it on those things. So, but we're not. The ministry doesn't want us showing it as a separate thing. They want it integrated with our operating fund. So, in essence, it looks like, oh, are you subsidizing your operations with that? We aren't. So just to be clear about that. So I don't know if that was your. But the policy.
So, we had a couple of internal discussions about it with the superintendent, and there's definitely a tension there, right? The policy says 3.5. If we had 3.5, which we did, it would be taken away from us potentially, right? I'm just calling it as it is, right?
Which it was.
Which it was, yeah, which it was. I mean, you even saw the $5 million, in fact, it's on this very slide right here, coming out and paying for a school. So I agree, you know, as a trustee, I'd be looking at this and going, well, you're not meeting one of the policies. So what do we do? Do we ask you to meet that policy or do we change the policy? I think it probably warrants a little bit more discussion ongoing. I probably, as far as we can take it tonight, I would expect. But if you've got further comments, we'd be glad to hear them.
Are there? Oh, Trustee Smirky.
Thank you. The question I had actually touches exactly on that tension you were describing. So my understanding, we're using about $560,000 of that unrestricted surplus to balance the amended budget. My recollection is last year we also balanced it with dipping into unrestricted surplus. Am I correct in that?
I have to look at the file.
Oh,
I think we've presented that maybe 2 years ago. I think it was about 600,000. In the end, we didn't have to use it because we had a larger surplus at the end of the year. So we have gone down this road before.
the tension that I want to highlight is not just with policy 611, but also with the closer we get to that 3.5%, the request for capital cost share. So I'm just wondering, has there been any discussion about what a $3 million unrestricted surplus looks like and how we're answering questions from the ministry if they say we're interested in a project, but we also see that you have, nearly 2% of your budget sitting there?
Yeah, and I'm not going to say too much, but yeah, we constantly have discussions with the ministry saying, this is an unfair position to put us in, to have to make a choice. Do we want a new school or do we want to meet the objectives of our strategic plan initiatives, which is what some districts are tending to do. They're pushing back with the ministry and having this just like, look, this money is intended for meeting our strategic initiatives. It's not meant to build buildings, and so then we're trying to change the conversation that way to say, this isn't just money in the bank, that it has a purpose. So that's the best we can do for now. The ministry will say that they're caught in the middle between us and the Treasury, but we'll just continue having those discussions.
Go ahead, Trustee Ball.
So I'm going to ask the same question I asked in the budget committee meeting, and that was when the board agreed and requested that the school district hire one more teacher for the early success program. Is that contained within this budget, this amended budget? Or did it go into the?
Yeah.
We're agreeing it's the amended budget after caucus. Yes, it's in this amended budget.
It's in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, trustees. We are at the point. I think we've had all the questions that that everyone has, and I just wanted to point out for new trustees in particular that budgets require 3 readings, and there is an opportunity if we wanted to pass them all tonight, but we're not proposing to do that because it's nice to have at least 2 meetings to think and whatever. But this does need to be submitted to the ministry by the end of February, so we are going to recommend at the next meeting that we pass the other 2 in one meeting. Just so you know, in case anyone was wondering about that. But yes, Trustee Spikey, if you're willing, it'd be great to have you have a motion on the floor.
Certainly, I would move that the Board of Education approve the first reading of the 22-23 amended annual budget bylaw in the amount of $201,292,491.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Ball. Trustee Spanky, did you want to speak to the motion at all?
No, I think we'll have the opportunity to speak to the merits of the motion when we get to second and third reading.
Does anyone have anything to say on this motion? Reminder, it is just first reading, so we could ask lots more questions and comments when we're actually going to pass the budget at the end, but don't feel free to talk. I'm not saying you can't talk, just. All right, seeing none, all those in favor of passing the first reading of the 2022-2023 amended annual budget? Thank you, trustees, that's unanimous. All right, we're moving on to 4.2, 2023-2024 draft school calendar consultation. Superintendent?
Thank you, Board Chair. So what you have in front is the draft calendar for the 23-24. The recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the draft 2023-2024 school calendar as outlined for feedback from employees, parents, guardians, caregivers, and the public as per Section 87.1 of the School Act and also school calendar regulations. It is a requirement that the Board of Education consult with the public a month prior to submitting the calendar to the Minister of Education, which is the end of March.
I just wanted to interrupt, the wording of this implies that we're passing which normally trustee Swanky and I would recuse ourselves for, but I was under the impression that this is just about the approval process and that we weren't in conflict. Could you speak to that?
That is correct. This particular motion is to garner feedback, so you're approving the calendar for public feedback, and then it's brought back.
So, trustee Swanky, I could see you waving your hand, and I had the same question. So, we are not approving the calendar, we're approving that this is the calendar we're submitting to the public for feedback, and we're allowed to vote on that, we're not allowed to vote on it. But, well, I mean, it's up to us to recuse ourselves, but we would normally typically recuse ourselves when it's actually being passed by the district, but it's fine for us to say this is what we're sending to the public, apparently. That's what the
And that
advice
is
has been.
correct.
I would like, if I may. Given the perception, I think I would be more comfortable if I was recused from the conversation at this point.
Good, thank you. So what we have in front of you, so generally if there was conflict, trustees, they can't vote on the school calendar before it's being sent to the Minister of Education, and that was the question that was on the table. What we have is, after discussion, we have the information regarding the local school calendar for the 2023-2024 school year. Attached to this documentation is a colorful calendar that talks about how we count days. We also look at professional days as well as other days. And there is a formula as well as at the bottom of the screen, there are a total number of days in session, which is 188. And then if you take away the non-instructional days as well as administration days, as well as assessment evaluation days, comes and we lose 10 days there, comes out to 178 days of instructional days that students are in session. So if I go back to the documentation that talks about total days in session is 188. If you take away those days that I talked about, total days of instruction is 178. And from that, we can actually figure out the number of minutes we have to work instruction per day to meet the minimum number of instructional hours set up by the calendar regulation for elementary, middle, and secondary school students. It's a calendar with a 2-week spring break, 1 administration day. There are 6 professional days, including a school-based professional day. We got plans for that collectively for this for the following school year. One of the remaining 5 professional days, excluding the provincial day, we are looking at cumulative activities. It'll be focused on enhancing Indigenous student activity and integrating Indigenous worldviews and perspectives into our learning environments. That's part of the BC calendar regulations. 1 early dismissal after each of the 2 written learning updates and 1 after the final summary of learning at the end of the year. Then there are 3 days for student assessment, evaluation, and parent-teacher consultation. And these days will support student assessment, evaluation, and parent-teacher meetings, as indicated. So part of this conversation now is the board's approving this calendar so it can go out, so we can consult with parents. It'll be approximately about a month or so, but here is a proposal. So yeah, the local calendar will be approved by the board for feedback by employees. And then it's going to come back to the Board of Education with the information provided by employees, parents, caregivers, and the community. And at that particular point is when the board will approve the school calendar for the 2023-2024 school year. It's going to be posted on our district website starting this Friday, finishing off February 15th with a link to an online survey of SurveyMonkey. Survey will be emailed to all parents, guardians, caregivers through My Education system. We'll have an ad. It's part of the documentation here. The ad will go out in the Progress newspaper. Again, requesting parents to provide parents, guardians, caregivers as well as employees to provide feedback, and then also information emailed out to all of our schools. And then generally, when we put something on our district site banner, it populates automatically across all school sites. So then that information also is shared. And then last but not least, we have the school calendar, as well as one last piece. We will have a copy of the survey at the board office for parents that would rather come in personally and fill out the survey, and that'll be available at the front desk for the duration specified and the survey is here for your consideration. And then here's the advertisement that'll go in the Progress newspaper with the QR code for people to be able to scan that easily and access the survey so they can provide feedback. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do I have a trustee ready to make the motion? Trustee Moss?
Well, actually, I have a question first. So normally, when we have this calendar proposal, we propose at least 2 calendars to the general public. And the public weighs in on which calendar they prefer, 1 week or 2 weeks, because 1 week is actually the norm within our contractual obligations, but 2 weeks is what everybody wants. Or not necessarily everybody, but so why this time are we just putting out 1 calendar? It's either a yes or a no, or there's not really any options. Maybe you can expand on that.
Thank you. Part of our conversation is with our local union around calendar consultation, and we come to a resolution about what's best for the school district based on feedback from previous years. Then having said that, the survey does ask for feedback from parents and guardians, and that feedback will come back to the Board of Education. Does that answer your question?
Only 1 calendar, not 2. Contractual obligations is the answer.
Go ahead.
Thank you. No, it's actually a discussion. Part of our agreement is having a conversation with our local union around a common calendar. Part of that is also looking at some of the constraints and considerations. And then we come to a resolution about the option, which includes a 2-week spring break plus all of the information that I provided.
Just to clarify, you're essentially saying there isn't 2 options because there's been an agreement, like where we've worked through all the things, and so there's no argument really happening. This is a proposed calendar, and we're seeing what the public thinks about it, essentially.
That is correct. That is correct. I guess in previous years, going back, we had a couple of options. And at that particular point, we didn't have agreement, and now we work on towards getting a common agreement before it goes up for consultation.
Trustee Moss?
But just to clarify, but we are obliged by the School Act to go out to the public and ask them what they think of this, right? And so it kind of seems like it's a fait accompli, but because we're obliged to ask the public, we still do.
It is super important to consult with the public. For whatever reason, public comes back and says they would like an alternate calendar. That's great feedback for the Board of Education.
And also, I mean, both of you at the district office and the unions involved are working with one set of assumptions. If the public was all of a sudden gave new information, both sides might change their mind. So we're working as a team, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, is anyone ready to make the motion? Or anyone have any more questions? Sorry.
Just a quick, just for clarification more for the audience, like, is that some of these things are, like, the time is so tight and you're so limited in what you can do. The calendar has not much room anymore because we have a beginning and an end. We have to fulfill certain days in between. So it's really tough to create 2 or 3 proposals. It's very difficult to even hardly get this one to fit the obligations with everybody involved. That's my experience on reading it.
Thank you, Trustee Frose. Thanks. Anyone else have a question? Oh, Trustee Westerby, you're on it.
I'd like to move that the Board of Education approve the draft 2023-2024 school calendar as outlined for feedback from employees, parents, guardians, caregivers, and the public.
Sorry, Trustee Bondar, thank you very much. Do you wish to speak to the motion you just made first?
Sure, yeah. Just to echo what Richard said, it's a lot of work to put this together and appreciate the consultation and feedback required. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what the public has to say.
All right, do any other trustees wish to speak to the motion on the floor? All right, seeing no one, all those in favor of approving the draft school calendar for feedback from parents, guardians, employees, and the public? Thank you. That is unanimous of those who voted, but noting that trustee Swanky is abstaining and has recused himself from the discussion. Oops, I muted myself by accident. Okay, now we're moving on to 4.3, dyslexia / learning disabilities funding and policy. This is a motion by trustee Moss. If you want to, hold on one second. Just going down to the, okay, so yes, if you want to do your backgrounder on it, and then we can ask some questions and stuff, and then I'll get you to move your motion after we've done that. That would be perfect.
Sure, thank you. So I was actually contacted by Dyslexia BC as this was a motion that is a very good idea. So a little bit of background. The ministry stopped funding students with learning disabilities / dyslexia, which we call Category Q, about 20 years ago. And so what we're asking, what this motion is asking, is that we ask the ministry to reinstate this funding. And some good news in that respect is when Premier Eby appointed the new Minister of Education, the Honorable Rashna Singh. In his letter to her, he stated that he actually used the word dyslexia. Teachers and required stakeholders identify opportunities to expand services and interventions for kids with dyslexia and related learning differences. And then further, he says, continue to work with boards of education to ensure all students have the supports they need to be successful. And so that would speak to the second part of my motion. And then providing support to children and youth with disabilities and special learning needs. So that gives me some optimism in working with the new Premier and the new Minister of Education that these students who struggle to read will get the supports that they really do need, and we need, so that we can properly fund the services that we are providing for them. And I think that we're talking about simply reinstating that money that we used to get for them, which was significant, and also the ability to stabilize the early intervention that we give all students in kindergarten to identify kids with learning disabilities right off the mark. And if every school district is doing this, then we're all on the same page and we're all treating these kids the same with a standardization that gives us confidence that we can actually treat these differences that they have in learning early, and actually saving everybody a whole lot of money in the long run, because we all know that the sooner you treat students with learning disabilities and dyslexia, the sooner you help them, and the less money it costs in the long run.
Thank you, Trustee Moss. I'm just going to interrupt you. Sorry, just you're starting to get into actually arguing the motion. I want you to be able to do that after it's actually on the floor. So I do want to give the superintendent a second to talk about a little bit of the background from his perspective, and then I'll let you move your motion, and then you can talk a little bit more about why you want the motion to pass after that. I just wanted to make sure we all knew what the background for this motion was. So
Sure.
Superintendent, would you be able to give us a little bit of, I know you had some things you wanted to point out about testing especially.
Sure, thank you, Board Chair, and I think it's always great. I think generally, I think the Q category funding was taken away back in 2004, so that, again, that's supported, being able to access more resources. I think early intervention and access to resources is imperative for all kids. We talk about it constantly. In early years, we look at focusing on rich classroom assessments. I know in Chilliwack, we got a plethora of assessments at the kindergarten level. Vision observation records, hearing observation records, concepts about print, letter identification, phonological awareness screens, and fine motor skills, plus other screens too, all the way up to including grade 3, and then again, other sets from 4 to 8. I think the key would be, and I think, again, my team can provide some insight into this particular piece. The initial focus is providing supports for all students in kindergarten, additional time, direct instruction of strategies, and also being able to identify supports for their individual disabilities based on the local screeners, as well as we also have a universal screener. So Chilliwack, that's the Chilliwack story by itself. And the key would be is that we want to be very mindful that we provide those supports earlier on. We want to look at early warning signs of a reading problem to know what specific clues to look for based on all of our assessments, as well as to understand the most sound approach to teaching based on what we have. And so for Chilliwack, that's been a common practice for years. I'm looking towards the team to add anything else to it. Team, anything else to add?
Sure, thanks, Ron. I think, when we're looking at our LD categories, particularly like our Q categories, we have about 500 students right now that are in that group. And the funding doesn't come out of the special ed grant, it's part of our core funding. So our psych eds, our LATs, those are supported through core. And as Rohan has mentioned, the screening starts very early, right from kindergarten. There's a whole range, and there's ministry policy, and then there's our own internal procedures. Ours is very well laid out. So if you want to look, that's certainly on our website or our SharePoint. We can show you the type of screeners that are taking place, and I think our curriculum department does a very good job of educating our classroom teachers around that. But on the other side, we also have some really well-developed support. So that training then extends into our learning resource departments, where they are coming alongside those teachers to support any areas that we see as early difficulties. And then it gets further. If there's more needed, we do our LATs also do WIAT testing, which gives us more information. And then ultimately, we have our psychologist who will do like a full psych ed. And at that point, you can really dig in and get the language from the DSM to really understand where the learning disability is. If it's in reading and it's related to dyslexia, those are also information they can pass on to the teacher, to the parents, and then also find the supports for those kids as well.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add before I ask Trustee Moss to make a motion? Oh, yes, Trustee Prosy, do you have a question?
Yeah, so if I can just put this in understanding, what you're saying is there is already screening for dyslexia or whatever there is out there. So every student is analyzed individually. So if they have dyslexia, they can be addressed. So you're saying that this, the question is maybe this is directed towards Rowan and Heather. So are you seeing that there's not dyslexia intervention? Like there's no intervention for people with dyslexia? Because I thought every student was sort of gauged individually for special needs, and then would be analyzed and taken from that level. Am I correct in that or incorrect?
I think perhaps I'll just let the superintendent respond to that, and then I think Trustee Moss, I'm not going to speak for her, but I think in her motion, that is what she is suggesting, is that there's not enough testing. So I think the superintendent just wanted to give some context for what's currently happening. So trustees go into this motion with some prior knowledge, and then we can debate the motion once it's on the floor. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I think a piece that I want to clarify is Mr. Manuel referenced a full psych ed.
Yeah.
That assessment is generally not given, until a student is in late grade 3 or even grade 4 and beyond, because that's when the developmentally the gaps start to really show. And so that's the assessment where thank you, starts to really come up, and that test actually tests for that. Previous, it's more around classroom observation, students reversals, and some of those pieces that come up, but we don't actually systemically screen for dyslexia at the younger ages, which I think is what Trustee Moz is saying. So we do address it, but we address it later on. If that helps.
I guess just since staff won't be able to, isn't supposed to speak to the motion when it's on the floor, I just want to clarify, or for the benefit of the board, if there's a reason why you might not want to test for learning disabilities at kindergarten, from your perspective, and then we'll just debate the motion. I just want people to go into the motion with the right, like with both sides of the issue. If there is both sides, maybe you're all in agreement with this, but is there a reason why you might not want to screen kindergartners for dyslexia, for example? Is there any potential problem with that?
I'll just start off. One plus would be given the context. Mainly because the fact that we have students coming from a variety of backgrounds, and I think at that early stage, there has to be time given for language development, generally grades 1 and 2, plus on top of our local screeners allows teachers to really ascertain if there are going to be any additional gaps. And as Dr. Savage talked about the fact that generally we start to look at a psych ed assessment in grade 3 or grade 4. But again, along the line, we have lots of information that we can garner, and we have unique strategies for the students from kindergarten to grade 3. So we got to be mindful of the fact that we have multiple places to look for that we implement for all kids from kindergarten to grade 3.
Okay, thanks. I think we probably, oh, do you have a question? Yeah, okay.
It's just about the funding part. So just want to clarify that what we're asking for is the motion is to request in writing that the ministry allocate funding for the whole province. So is that, why did they withdraw the funding? Do we know?
So well, I don't think I know the answer, but I do know that it was shifted into what's in core funding. And so some categories are funded with additional funds. So we call it level 1, 2, and 3, depending on the supports needed. And some were part of what's available to all students. So the best answer I can come up with is something like assessments is done prior to a student having a category. So I think the ministry was ensuring that that's something that is available. It's not a funded, you don't get additional funding to do assessments. You are required to do it for all kids. And so in the same way, learning disabilities, gifted, some of these categories were taken out of that. I don't have a problem with getting more money. If ministry was going to fund category Q, that'd be great for us.
Okay, I think in the interest of not doing too much, like, we should be debating the motion now, I think. I just wanted to make sure everyone had some background so that we all kind of know going into this what the scene is in our district. And then I'll have Trustee Moz, you can make your motion, speak to your motion, and then people can speak to the motion now. And if you do if a question comes up along the way, you can still ask questions. But, like, yeah, but I mean, I think we're starting to just be sort of quasi-debating, and I don't think that's best practice for Robert's Rules. So let's go, Trustee.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to put the motion on the table right now. So that the Board of Education request in writing that the Ministry of Education and Child Care allocate direct funding to the special needs category Q so that students with learning disabilities can have better access to resources. And that the Board of Education request in writing that the Ministry of Education and Child Care move toward making policy to facilitate screening readers starting in kindergarten, ensuring structured literacy is accessed in all schools, including mainstream, distributed learning, and special education classrooms.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Trustee Bondar? All right, would you like to speak?
Thank you. So I want to start by saying what I'm not doing here is criticizing our school district. I'm not saying that we don't have good practices. What I'm saying is, in this motion, we need the Ministry of Education and Childcare needs to make a policy for that every school district screen readers. This is not about what we're doing or how we're doing it. This is about holding the Ministry of Education responsible for all of the taxpayer money that they use towards giving kids an education. And if that money that we're using that's coming out of our main budget, and that's, I think, why we don't do the screening in kindergarten realistically, because it's expensive to run, especially if you're not getting extra funds, then they need to be responsible to all of us for these kids. And the longer they go without the extra help they need, the more expensive they get for all of us. And if you don't address a student's learning issues until grade 4, then they are on a steep uphill battle. And as adults, these kids have to go into a bank and sign a mortgage. They got to read that mortgage. And that's going to be difficult for some of them. Well, we could prevent that. And I see this motion, and this motion is about the Ministry of Education. It's not about us and what we're doing here. And so please don't misunderstand why I'm bringing this motion forward, because I appreciate the good work of the school district and the teachers and the staff that we have that are working and doing their best. But we could do better. We can always do better. And so this is about holding the Ministry of Education's feet to the fire, saying, give us back the money for those kids that you took away 20 years ago, and let's provide them with the screening that they need right off the get-go, and give them all a fighting chance. So.
All right, Trustee Procey.
So for clarification, Heather, would that not apply to autism and other things? Would that not, would this motion not be, would this whole concept not be better, like for the school district to implement right away in kindergarten? Like whether it's dyslexia, whether it's autism, or whether it's anything? Is there a reason why we pick one or the other? Or can we include all of them in there? Do you have an idea of how that would work or what that would look like?
Trustee Procey, I think I can speak just a little bit to the autism does receive funding already. So there are a whole bunch of categories that are funded. Dyslexia specifically lost its funding approximately 20 years ago. So there is no extra money for dyslexia. So that's the reason for this motion is it's an unfunded category. So the kids have a category. They're marked down on our records as, having a learning disability, but we don't get extra money for them like we do for kids with other categories. So this is a specific.
So would that solve, like, is that early prevention, is that necessary to overcome dyslexia or to work through it?
Would you like me to answer? Through the chair?
I'll. You can answer, Trustee Procey, to clarify why you.
Yes, because if students don't receive the early intervention that they need, then they just fall further and further behind. There's a paper written by Keith Stanovich, an internationally renowned psychologist. He wrote a paper called The Matthew Effect, and in it he talks about the fact that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So your good readers get better and better and better, and your poor readers just get worse and worse and worse. So you get this divide, and so that's why it's necessary. And these are intelligent kids.
Trustee Bondar.
Thank you. Yeah, I also have a sort of a clarifying question. I absolutely agree that we can be asking the ministry for more money, specifically for Category Q. It seems we're all a little bit mystified as to why that was removed in the first place. What I would love some clarification on is there's been some talk about assessments that do happen in our schools, but what do we have that directly compares at the kindergarten level for students that are just starting to look at letters, to look at words. Are we doing something akin to a dyslexia screening within some of our overarching screening processes? That might be a question for assistant superintendents. Thank you.
Perhaps staff could speak to that a little bit. I believe some of them were sort of listed on the superintendent's thing, like,
Oh, sorry.
Did you use my thing without?
Thanks, Trustee Richel. So yeah, superintendent did list some of those screeners already. So particularly around letter identification, that's a big one for our kindergarten teachers with their students. And then there's some phonological awareness test screeners that also take place. Those are really important as well. So the answer is yes. Specifically for dyslexia, though, the answer would be no, right? It gives educators signals that may need to refer students on for further testing, but we do need an expert to give that dyslexia designation.
Trustee Reed?
Yeah, so in the lead up to the meeting, there were some stakeholder concerns communicated by email. And I'm trying to understand those concerns as they were brought forward. So, about autonomy of funding within the district. And my interpretation of it was that we wouldn't be as nimble to move around with the funding if we do this. But I was wondering if I think we all read the email from stakeholders, and I'm just having a hard time interpreting that because it doesn't seem like it applies to your motion. Could somebody speak to that? I really need a clarification.
Superintendent, did you see the email that we received before the meeting, perchance? I believe that you were CC'd.
I did. It is. I probably can answer, and I think the intent of from the stakeholders was around the fact that we have early assessments in our school district, and that we have autonomy also. And my perception is that we don't want to have a universal screener from across all 60 school districts. That would take away the work that we do collectively, and I think that's the piece that I got from the stakeholder email.
That was my interpretation as well, not so much that we don't want extra money, but that we don't want the money to then be allocated to a specific screener when there's other things we're doing already that might be more beneficial to more students, I believe was the intent of the email. Do you have a follow-up, Trustee Reed? Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I don't know why yours is doing that.
and it's just my voice. I don't know. I was just wondering, would this be an appropriate time to ask Trustee Moss if she has something to speak to that objection? Is this a okay time in the process to do that? I would just like to understand better.
I think that really once a motion, so I'm just going to be the chair now, sorry. So once a motion is on the floor, it doesn't really belong to the mover anymore, it belongs to the board. So we're all speaking to, Trustee Moss has defended her motion, we're all going to speak to what we see, we can debate it, everyone gets 2 chances to speak. If we keep going back to Trustee Moss, and she gets 8 chances to speak, and that's not really fair. So she did get a chance to put her rationale on the table before, or move, so that's just,
So
I'm just being Robert Rossi.
Okay.
I'm trying not to get it too loosey-goosey, so yeah.
Okay.
Trustee Westerby.
Yeah, I'm just speaking to both these motions. I personally don't see necessarily anything that stands out that would seem like there's any, because honestly, extra money for students with disabilities and extra resources to help screen them, and that all sounds great. But I would like to hear more about how this would affect our partner groups and things, because I feel like as as Trustee Reed pointed out, there's just some gaps in our knowledge. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't affect the process and funding and budgets and things like that, because I would absolutely would love to ask for more money. So I'm not really sure my point otherwise than just I think I need more information.
I have a comment, but if anyone else, if you wanted to speak first, Trustee Spanky, I sort of saw you hovering.
I have two questions to put through the chair to staff, but perhaps I'll just cede with the chair. There may be consideration of dividing these two motions. I think there's possibly separate considerations and it might provide clarity to the board. But just while you're considering that, I did want to put through the chair to staff. Is there any distinction between allocate direct funding? Is that different from other types of funding that we receive to support category students? And is category Q the only unfunded category of students that we support and designate in the district?
So we don't get additional funding for category Q, which is LD, or P, which is gifted, or K, which is mild intellectual disabilities. And the other ones are funded. Or have additional fundings level, and here's a quick lesson, it's level 1, level 2, or level 3, depending on the category.
And this is connected to that earlier conversation in the budget where we had, I think, 82 less students, but 70 more students that were already here that received designations. And so roughly, this is ballpark, but the rough grant for every student is around $8,000. Whereas the special education funding goes in those three tiers, roughly $10,000, $20,000, and $40,000. So that's why the 70 students that had the designations brought in more dollars to the district than the 82 that left, right? So.
Trustee Smekey, you had a follow-up?
Just to the first part of my question about direct funding, is that somehow different from funding we normally, or is that perhaps it's a question for the mover? I'm just wondering if there's a different intention of direct funding as opposed to just asking for allocate funding to.
Oh yeah, is there a reason for the word direct? I think he's just clarifying the actual wording.
I don't know.
Fair enough. I personally would support dividing this motion into two because I have really personally don't have any qualms really about the first part. Possibly we could add the other two categories in there, honestly, but I'm always for asking the minister for more money. I think that's a good idea. I do have some concerns about the second part, but they could possibly be allayed through debate, but I would feel more comfortable personally dividing the motion into two. Trustee Swain?
I at this point would just advise the chair, you are able to make that ruling. If you would rather, I'm prepared to make that motion.
Okay, so are you sure I can just say it?
Before we got this far,
Okay.
You can rule.
Okay. Maybe I'll just get you to move it. I think that's a little tighter.
I would move that we divide the two questions. We've done this before, just for a minute taker. It's the same mover and seconder for each motion. Once we dispose of one, that second one immediately comes to the floor with the same mover.
We have to have a seconder for the division, though, and then a vote. Okay. Do we have a seconder for dividing the motion? Trustee Bondar, thank you very much. All those in favor of dividing the motion. So this is just to split in two. It doesn't mean you're supporting either side. It's just to debate them separately. All those in favor of division of the question? Opposed to division of the question?
I don't really know, sorry, I'm a little bit confused what the division is.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we have the recommendation that the Board of Education request funding and that the Board of Education requests that the minister create like a special screener for kindergarten. So we've divided the question into the first part. So now we're just going to debate the first part. And then we're going to debate the second part as two separate motions now instead of it all being one because they're quite different. And then that way it allows us to. Okay. Sorry, you were confused. So we did actually have the vote. We'll just mark it down. unless you have an opinion now, I can recall. Okay. Okay. So that did carry to divide the motion. So we're going to go to the first part of the motion. So that is that the Board of Education requests in writing that the Ministry of Education and Child Care allocate direct funding to the special needs category Q so that students with learning disabilities can have better access to resources. And I didn't actually speak to the motion before, so I'm gonna speak now to this, I guess, because I didn't speak really before. So I think we should do this. I think it's a good idea. I was a teacher when the kind of category funding was taken away. Actually, what happened is it happened right after I got off mat leave, and it was like I went off and education was fine, and then I came back and it was like a bomb had gone off, and the funding had been cut, and the classes were oversized, and there's no more EAs because they all got fired. It was really bad, and it's basically continued to be really bad because we never got that funding back. So I would very highly advocate for requesting this. I do slightly question why we would just be asking for Q, because it seems like K was even more of a problem actually, that we lost that one. But I'm not necessarily opposed to just asking for Q at this point. Maybe we could do another motion at another time. So I'd be in favor of this motion, I think. But I will open it to the floor for anyone else who wants to speak to the first half of this question that we're now debating.
So what I would caution is that we don't want the money because we want more money. We want the kids to have early prevention in every aspect. And if that comes with money, that's the benefit of it. But regardless of that, we should still, our focus should not be getting more money, although we may need more money, but our focus should be, we got these little kids coming in there and they're being left behind, or they're missing that early intervention, which is so critical for their development. So I think that the focus should not be that we're getting more money. The focus should be, are the kids coming into the school and are they being assessed quickly and prudently so that they can advance in a better way, in a better fashion. Just because the money won't do it. But it will help.
Trustee Moss.
Well, I will vote in favor of this motion, obviously. However, the reason I voted against separating these two is because one is a means to the end of the other. And if we just get more money and they just put it in the big pot, then how do we know that the most meaningful, structured means of the end for those students is going to be met? And that's why these two motions together, or these two statements together, are meaningful.
Anybody else want to speak to this part of the motion? Yes, Trustee Westbury.
Just as I said before, we definitely, more money is required, as we saw in the budget. We did get more money per student that had disability status, but the cost is also increased. So the funding per student, which is direct funding, I looked it up, would be helpful in the case that it would help us reach our budget and be able to give them access to what they should expect coming into our school. So I would speak in favor of the motion.
Does anyone else want to speak to the requesting the minister more funding for category Q? It looks like there isn't anyone else who wants to speak to that motion at this point, so we will have the vote on. Okay, so all those in favor that the Board of Education request in writing that the Minister of Education and Childcare allocate direct funding to the special needs category of Q so that students with learning disabilities can have better access to resources. All those in favor? Thank you, trustees. That's unanimous. Okay, so now we're going to move on to that the Board of Education request in writing that the Minister of Education and Childcare move toward making policy to facilitate screening readers.
Can I check with that?
Yep.
I think we separated the motion, but I don't think anybody proposed. Does it matter? Or is it
It's the
separate?
same mover and seconder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it just
Okay.
immediately comes to the table.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. it was a mover and seconder from the beginning. Then we just separated it into two. Yeah. Okay. So now this is about screening readers starting in kindergarten and ensuring structured literacy is accessed in all schools, mainstream disability learning and special education classrooms. Okay. So now we're speaking to this part. Trustee Moz, you've already spoken, I think, a bunch about. So does anyone else want to speak to this part specifically? I want to. So I guess I didn't speak on this before either. So I'm concerned about screening for learning disabilities in kindergarten for a couple of reasons. And it's not that I don't want early interventions. If all kids were coming into our schools starting from the same point, this would be of course, we would want that. But it's really hard in kindergarten to ascertain if a kid does really badly on an assessment, if it's actually a learning disability, or if they're coming in because they haven't been read to, or they've got, whatever's happening at home or whatever. We don't know if they do badly on the screener in kindergarten, if they have a learning disability, or if they just haven't had a chance to learn yet. And that's partly why we do all these other assessments in the district. We check, do they recognize letters? We do all those things. They're flags for maybe this kid does have a learning disability, but oh gosh, they got to the end of grade 1 and they were so bright, now they know all their letters, they don't have a learning disability. So I'm a little bit concerned that if we did a screener for learning disabilities in kindergarten, that it wouldn't actually catch learning disabilities, it would sweep up a whole bunch of kids who don't actually have LD. Their parents would be freaking out, oh my gosh, my kid's got a learning disability, whatever, and then they don't. And it might actually direct a bunch of resources in the wrong direction. So that would be my concern with kindergarten screening, specifically. Not that we shouldn't do screenings, which we do screenings, but that having one specifically for learning disabilities. We know any kind of IQ testing, there's structural biases against certain types of families that certain kids do worse on them. So I'm just worried about kids getting labeled in kindergarten inaccurately and it being a distraction. And then I'm uncomfortable when trustees sort of prescribe specific educational strategies, given that most trustees obviously aren't educators. And so the second part where it's specifically saying that we want a specific type of reading instruction across the province, I don't feel like we're necessarily in the best position to recommend that. So it's not that I don't want kids to have early intervention, because I do very much so. I believe in early intervention, but I'm more comfortable with the kind of screenings that we do where we're catching all the kids, we find out where their struggles are, and we help them all. And then when they're a little bit older, if they're still not getting it, then we're starting to go, okay, this wasn't just a coming into school with lack of exposure to books. This is actually a problem, like they're not getting it even with it being taught. So that's why I would speak against this half, and I do apologize to Trustee Moss, because I know that it's your passion. It's not that I don't support the idea behind it, but I do know from being in education that some of the littles, when they come into kindergarten, they just don't start at the same place as everybody else, and I don't want them to be inaccurately labeled. Trustee Ponder, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to just follow up on a couple of points that I think are along similar lines to Trustee Richelt's points. I just wanted to make mention that we have had our district principal of early years start just in the past year, and I think there's been a lot of work towards our very early interventions and our earliest student experience. We've also heard from our local that the current interventions at the K to the K1 interventions are working quite well with both that new position as well as what is currently happening. So I just wanted to maybe put that out there, that maybe it might be something we ask for more feedback from our partner groups on it, if that's something that would be helpful for them. Because following up on your second point, I do worry a little bit when we sort of say you got to do something very specific, because we are not the ones on the ground, though the point and the motion is well received. Thank you.
Trustee Reed?
It's not gonna. Okay. I have some intensely personal anecdotal evidence regarding this motion. I have a reader that it should have been caught in kindergarten that she had learning difficulties, and now she's in 4th grade, and it feels too late, and it makes me panic. It makes her caregivers panic. So I understand the debate about not wanting to say something specifically, because I'm not an educator, but I am a parent, and I've spent so many nights awake thinking about this. Like, I actually want to. It's making me emotional thinking about it right now. I think that it should be logged as a concern for us and as a priority hugely. I can understand why we wouldn't ask for something specific, but it has to be on our radar. And there have to be other parents that feel the same way as me, because I've talked to them. and there's that input there. There has to be that input there. I just wanted to share that towards the motion.
Trustee Prosay.
So I would assume, I don't know if I addressed it to you, Trustee Rashid. So what I'm thinking here is, so dyslexia would be something that's identifiable, I presume, and something that would be fairly, there would be a science to it, I would assume. So I'm just wondering, on relating to your thought process on it, is there evidence that it could be misconstrued, or that students would actually, like, are not dyslexic but would think they are? Is that what you're referring to in your thought process there? And so is that dangerous, or is it just something that they would work through in time? Like, I'm just trying to understand, is there science to dyslexia? Is it easy to identify? Or is it something that's a little, because I understand what you're saying, because I just like nothing, I don't like bring my personal stuff in it, but we had a kid that they said wasn't ready, but was just different, if you know what I mean.
Mindful of the fact that I wasn't allowing Trustee Moss to just randomly answer questions based on her points, maybe I can throw it over to staff just to talk about kindergartners specifically, what they're like, why a test might be inaccurate. If I'm right, if I'm wrong, feel free to say I was wrong about that as well.
Thanks, Trustee Reichelt. So to your question, Trustee Prosy, yeah, our kindergartens, they come in with a wide variety of life experiences. And so what Trustee Reichelt was, I believe, trying to describe is that we as educators, we want to be very careful with respect to assessing students to ensure, I think you used the term a wide sweep, right? That some students may get swept up into being labeled, when really what they need is just some exposure to letters, letter sounds, words, and books. And once they are exposed to that, then the gap closes for those particular students. So yeah, we just want to be very careful. Now that being said, all of those primary screeners that we talked about, they do send up some flags for educators, right? And so that it does put that student on the school's radar, whether with the teacher, with the school-based team, for strategies that may provide some additional intervention. So for example, our K1 intervention, where students, they get their tier 1 instruction and then they get a double dose to see if we can close that gap for them. Does that help out answer your question? Okay.
Westerby.
I've been waiting to, I don't want to speak.
Go ahead, Trustee Moss.
So I kind of wanted to, I was kind of hanging back, waiting till everybody had spoken. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be prevented from speaking more than twice. So I took the Orton Gillingham training in 1993, and I tutored dyslexic students for 15 years pretty consistently, and then off and on in subsequent years. So I know from working with these students, here's the thing, if we screen them in kindergarten and we have red flags, we get on it. And so no harm, no foul. And I mean, dyslexia actually means can't read. So if they're struggling and they have issues in kindergarten and we screen them, then good. That's wonderful. There are actually many researched, illustrated practices of early intervention and screening practices in kindergarten. I went to the University of Hull in England, and I took a course in cognitive profiling system, and that was a software program. Actually brought it back to this school district, and they bought one copy, and I don't know that it ever really got used. This is a lot of years ago. But it actually was a profiling system for kindergarten kids, and it was very accurate. I actually ran a pilot project on it at High Road, and where I was tutoring a student, and it was very accurate for the whole kindergarten class. So it is entirely possible. And as I mentioned before, nobody loses when you do that. And to speak to Trustee Reed's concerns about the email that we got from the CTA president, we're arguing about apples and oranges here. We're talking about category Q, that the funding got completely cut. This is not about advocating for vulnerable students. This is talking about reinstating the money and using that money effectively. And so I don't really appreciate the implication that should this pass, then we won't be able to manage our budget properly, because that's actually not true.
Trustee
and
Moss,
so-
Trustee Moss, sorry, I just want to interrupt. Please don't sort of
I'm
cast
answering-
aspersions on the CTA's
I am answering
letter.
the email that we received from them prior to this motion coming to the table
What I'm
today.
saying is,
And-
excuse me, Trustee Moss, it is not appropriate in a public meeting to disparage a partner group because they gave us feedback. So please just don't do that. Carry on with your statements.
Thank you. I will finish. So, currently, as I said, all of our funding is coming out of our regular funding. And that's what we're using for screening students. That's why we need to have the two pieces together, the ask, and all we're doing, let's face it, we're asking the ministry for money. The chances that they're going to say yes to us are dicey at best. But we're not even asking them to implement anything. We're asking them to write a policy on structured, distributed or structured screening for kindergarten kids with the money that they're reinstating. And apparently they've got a lot of money now, so I don't see why they wouldn't give it to us. Thank you.
Trustee Westerby.
Thank you. Well, I greatly appreciate the passion that you share for learning disabilities and students here in the district. So what I'm hearing is that a lot of the issues that we're having about this is that it's about the specificity towards creating a policy and about the structured literacy and those specific words. So what I would propose is an amendment to the motion. That the Board of Education requests in writing that the Ministry of Education and Childcare move toward, and here's the amendment, funding additional early literacy screening interventions and resources. And it's a little bit more broad and it doesn't quite narrow across all districts what that means, what that looks like. And Trustee Maz seems to be fighting more for the funding for the early literacy screening. So I feel like the amendment would appease all of the discourse.
Thank you, Trustee Westerby. We need it to be on the screen so people can see it. Did someone see it so that we can get that put up and then I can ask for a seconder?
Can you just confirm?
I've got electronically email it.
Can you email it actually? That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
And Rohan as well.
Sorry, I'm just pointing out for those of you who haven't been to very many meetings, when we do amendments, we always just need to have them right on the screen because otherwise you start debating language and no one can see the language. It gets very confusing. So we are just going to slow the meeting down until that can be put up.
Sorry, I think I called it and I'm going to send it right now.
Are we showing the staff your Netflix? I mean, the public your Netflix?
That's awesome. You're right, continue watching
While we're pulling this up, I also want to add that I just want to reiterate what Trustee Maz said, that we're just asking the ministry for.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Yes.
This is respectfully out of order. There's a motion that needs to be seconded.
Oh,
and so.
sorry, yes, sorry. So yes, don't speak at it right now.
But it is a.
Yes, sorry, I was zoning out. I wasn't counting it as you speaking. Yes, don't speak it until it's up on the screen. Until we've had a seconder.
Would the chair consider a small break?
Hold on one second.
Terry.
you want to have a look at the screen? Does that reflect what you were?
Yeah.
We're in limbo.
Yes. Is that ready?
That's it. Yeah.
So, sorry, Trustee Swanky. So,
Say move toward, or did you say purpose? Yeah. I thought you said fund additional early literacy. That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
yeah, I think not move toward. Okay, Trustee Westerby, is what is on the screen what your amendment was intended to be?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Trustee Swanky. And I am just, before we debate the motion, I'm going to call a recess, a body break for those of us who need one. It's been a long meeting so far, so. Okay, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting back to order. All right, so an amendment is on the floor. If I could just ask the public to, if I could just ask the members of the public to stop talking now because the meeting's back in session. Thanks. Okay. All right. So we have the amendment on the floor. Trustee Westerby, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Sure, yes. But by the sounds of all the rigorous debate, this seems to at least in my opinion, solve the issues of being overly specific to, you know, not, so other districts who they get this information, it might not apply to them, so it's a little bit more generic. And it addresses the issue of funding, which was the tied motions together, so hopefully that appeases the mover, the original mover. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Swanky.
Thank you. I'll also speak in favor of the amendment. I think based on the discussion, I'm not hearing the need for policy. What I'm hearing the need for is resources to support expanded intervention, funded intervention. And I think that looking at this motion, we can even cite, if this becomes a letter, the impact of COVID, the value of early intervention, the alignment with the ministerial mandate letter. I think those are all considerations that we can put into that letter. I also want to highlight, it is before the budget is being tabled later this spring. Probably that consultation is done, but that should not prevent this board from saying this should be a priority. And this is something that perhaps we want to see included in that budget or as an update from that budget once it's tabled.
Anybody else wish to speak to the amendment? Trustee Moss?
Well, I will speak. I'm not going to say a yay or nay at this stage. I appreciate the intention. I appreciate the wanting to pass this. However, this takes the teeth away from the intention of this motion. In that we're not asking the ministry, we're not really asking them for anything by way of a policy. And really that's what we need is a policy around early screening and intervention. As I say, I do appreciate the intention here. In and of itself, I don't think it holds their feet to the fire in any way, shape, or form. But yeah.
Since I haven't spoken on this, I am more comfortable with this. I feel like we're asking for funding for early literacy screening. I definitely was, moved by Trustee Reed's personal anecdote about her personal situation. I think we are likely missing some kids, even to the best of our intentions. If we had more funding to put into early screening, I think that we would catch them, and it doesn't need to be necessarily prescriptive. If we had a lot more funding, if we had more bodies in our schools to do the screening, we wouldn't necessarily miss as many kids. So I think it really is mostly a funding issue. So I'm happy with this, to pass this as written now. I think more so than when it was more very specific. So does anybody else have anything to say, or can we vote on this? Okay, seeing nobody, all those in favor of the amendment, just to be clear, we have to vote twice because this is an amendment, so we have to vote on the amendment and then we have to vote again because this is the new motion. It's just weird the way it went because we divided first, but anyways, we do have to vote on the amendment and then we have to vote. So all those in favor of the amendment, so if you vote in favor of this, you technically could still vote against the motion. This is voting to say that yes, this is what we're voting on, essentially. This will be the new motion if we vote yes on this amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? All right, did you catch that?
I just abstained.
Okay, so now that is the motion, and so now we're voting, you're in favor or not in favor of sending this letter as part of the other request to the ministry. So all those in favor that the Board of Education request in writing that the Ministry of Education and Childcare fund additional early literacy screening interventions and resources. That's unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay. Thank you very much. That was a great discussion, everybody. Okay.
Chair, could I make a proposal as it, for a change to the agenda? I'd like to suggest that we, in light of the time, that we, since the privacy motion is time sensitive, that we do the privacy motion or the policy and leave the rest of the policies to the next meeting.
Superintendent, do we have an issue with doing that, with amending the agenda at this stage to eliminate some of the other policies and just focus on one, or do we not need to take that many off the agenda?
Not just focusing on policy 210 would be direction right now, and then bring the rest of the policies back to the next public meeting.
Okay. So can I just do that as chair, or do we need a motion to do that? What, pardon?
It's a motion.
Okay.
It's an approved agenda by the board.
Okay. So we need just, trustee Moz, can you move, I guess trustee Moz moved to skip to 4.6 in the interest of, and to defer the other items to the next agenda. Seconded by trustee Bondar. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of, hold on one second. Are we also skipping 4.7? Like, are we literally only going to discuss 4.6 then?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so,
Okay. So we're not skipping, we're just,
sorry, we're going to discuss only 4.6 and defer all of the other policy discussions to the next agenda. Does anyone have any comments on that? Oh, okay. Okay, all those in favor of doing the proposed change as the hour is getting late, and that will give us time to properly discuss that item? Opposed? Okay. That passes. All right. So we're gonna skip we're gonna skip all those. Okay, and then we're gonna go to 4.6, policy, 4.6.1, policy 210, privacy.
Thank you, Chair. So really quickly, this is a high-level policy. I just sort of go through some of the ministry legislation. So on November 2021, amendments to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy received royal assent. Two pieces from that. It's a summary on the ministry website. One was requiring public bodies to have a privacy management program. The second big piece is implementing a mandatory privacy breach reporting structure for public bodies. That was it. And so then on November 20th, 2022, the government approved an order in council which should bring into force Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Section 36.2, the new sections, and Section 36.3 will then reference requiring public bodies to have a privacy management program as well as reporting on breaches. So that's the piece. Then really quickly summarizing is the context. There are multiple documents, but privacy management program guidance for the BC public bodies. This is a documentation supported by the ministry. It talks about the fact that public bodies are required to make their privacy policies and any documented privacy processes or practices available to employees and where practicable to the public. And as a result, what I have in front of you is a privacy policy. I'm just going to put that up. Realistically, there are 3 regulations that accompanied administrative procedures. My apologies. That is just for information only. The key look is at our privacy policy by itself. I'll quickly go it. Some big pieces to look at is that the first bullet talks about the being open and transparent about the purpose of which personal information may be collected and used by the district. Really clear guidelines. The next one is personal information, collecting and using personal information only as necessary to carry out the district's authorized programs and activities. The third one is where Educational Policy Advisory Committee actually made some changes, sharing personal information internally with staff only on a need-to-know basis. Information was in the administrative procedure, so we did add the third bullet as outlined in the district's administrative procedures. Key pieces around sharing of personal information with third parties only with knowledge and consent of affected individuals, unless otherwise authorized but required by FIPA or FIPA. The last one is making sure ensuring personal information is protected against unauthorized access. We've got lots of systems in our system. This is an overarching policy. The key information is in the 3 administrative procedures. There is a requirement that this is coming to force before February 1st, and so hence the urgency of bringing it today for your consideration. That's it. Thank you.
Are there any questions, trustees? Trustee Swanky? Oh, Superintendent.
Just a question through the chair to staff. I know often the Office of the Ombudsperson provides input, opportunity to comment when requested. I just wondered if we'd reached out to their office for any comment on this proposed policy.
Thank you, Trustee Swanky. To my knowledge, and I know the previous Secretary Treasurer worked on this, we actually worked with legal.
Yes, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. I would move that the Board of Education approve Policy 210, Privacy as presented. The policy was presented at the Education Policy Advisory Committee in its draft form at its December 13th meeting.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Trustee Wester. Do you want to speak?
Sure, I'll just provide comment. The minutes of the December 13th meeting were included in this package. It did come with referral from the committee. There was significant discussion, some comment, and a minor addition talking about what the definition of kind of that need to know basis was when sharing information within the district. So being mindful of what those definitions and those boundaries are. Otherwise, it generally had support.
Trustee Moss?
And this is fully vetted by legal, this is check the boxes, and so we know we're on the right path with this policy.
Just really quickly, on top of legal, we also looked across other school districts around the framework by itself, consulted with legal, and then senior staff by itself. So lots of levels of supports to make sure that we are in compliance with what's required out of the FOIPA Act.
Anybody else have any comments before we move to a vote on this policy? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor that the Board of Education approve Policy 210, Privacy as presented? Thank you, trustees. That's unanimous. I guess, yes. We're moving on to information items. So 5.1 is Budget Advisory Committee Report. That would be Trustee Swanky? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. The committee minutes are before you. The committee convened on January 12th. We had I'd say a very strong representation and turnout, including representation from 3 of our 5 secondary schools, which was great to have their input and insight for the discussion. I think that the substance of the meeting was well highlighted by our Secretary Treasurer and Assistant Secretary Treasurer. There was some minor input provided to the committee, and that provided some updates to the slides, so that was greatly appreciated. Otherwise, the committee will be reconvening in February, and we'll provide a future report at that time.
Thank you very much. BCSTA report. This would be Trustee Reed.
Yeah, so there's some pretty important upcoming dates. We do have our branch meeting on January 30th in Abbotsford at the new elementary school. Just a reminder that elections will be held at the January meeting and that people can put their names forward for nominations to the executive board for BC, for the branch. What was the... Sorry. The provincial council is February 24th and 25th, and we are looking at a motion deadline for provincial council of January 25th, which is why I wanted to highlight that. So if you have any motions that you want to do, and then AGM motion deadlines for extraordinary motions is February 15th. Substantive motions February 24th, and late motions is March 27th. I just wanted to highlight those deadlines. I will put those out in kind of a summary. And then you did highlight in your board chair meeting minutes as well that BCSTA is offering education sessions for new and experienced trustees regarding governance and a few other things. So there is information on the BCSTA hub as usual. So that's all I wanted to highlight.
Thank you very much, Trustee Reed. So now we're on to trustee written reports. Those are in your package, and I did want to highlight, since they're written, I want to make sure everyone noticed that Trustee Moss has a notice of motion in there. So the notice of motion that the Board of Education write a parents' rights policy. The information and backgrounder that she wrote is in the package. I just wanted to make sure you've seen it, so you can take a look at that, and then that will go on to a future agenda. And then 5.4, the meeting summaries. The meeting summaries are in the package. And then the next Board of Education meeting is February 7th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. And now we're moving on to public participation. This is questions concerning the agenda. Does anybody in the public have any questions? And when you get to the mic, say your name, introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Debbie Chand. I'm a teacher librarian in the district. I'm sorry for the funny voice. I think I was reading a lot today, actually. It disappeared on me. What I was wondering is, in light of a whole lot of conversation around early years assessment and around the kindergarten sort of testing that's done, I'm wondering if the board could give some extra thought or time, and I know that this is hard for everybody, but it's my experience over 32 years of teaching in Chilliwack now that often assessments done at any grade where you're asked to pull one student while you are still responsible for teaching and overseeing 20 little 4 and 5-year-olds. One class we have 4 that were still 4 until December, or you're teaching 29 grade 4s as you're trying to do an individual assessment. That I'm wondering if there's a possibility to look at how to support the teachers to be able to do that so that your assessment is authentic. Because to be perfectly honest, because I have been involved in doing some of that early learnings assessment in September to help out our K teachers. But when you're sitting in a classroom with 24-year-olds or 24 and 5-year-olds, and you're asking them to tell you what's the name of this letter or what sound does this letter make, and there's kids doing centers or there's kids running around playing tag, and your attention is, Johnny, sit down. Oh, tell me this one again. No. Joey, put the toy, like, it's, I'm not sure that it's as authentic as we could be receiving. And I think that that's a valuable piece to look at if you're wanting to look at that assessment and make some, some suggestions on programs and interventions and things like that. I think we need to make sure that our assessments then are as authentic and as true as possible. And that is one of the pieces. So whether it's releasing the teacher so that another teacher can go in and that classroom teacher can take their child out and assess, whatever that looks like, but that's a piece to consider when you're looking at those assessments throughout the grades, but certainly with the early learning ones. And the other thing that I was just wondering is we were talking about sort of numbers of kids coming in, an extra number of our special needs kids coming in September. I'm wondering if there is a higher number of our students that are coming in already designated at the kindergarten level. I'm thinking about my site, and it seems to me, and this is just, my brain trying to remember, but that there might have been more students this year coming into kindergarten with those assessments done. And so what's changed in Chilliwack, perhaps, that our kids are getting seen at a younger age, and maybe some of those assessments, particularly for autism, are getting done at an earlier age so that they're not waiting until those kids are in sort of grade 2 and grade 3 and we're going, Okay, that behavior hasn't changed. That's really, now it's becoming quite different from his peers or her peers. And then you're looking for assessments to be done. So I just wonder if that might be a piece that something's changed within Chilliwack to have more kids with assessments. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, your point about the staffing required to do accurate assessments is well taken. I think that's partly why we're asking for funding, because if we had more funding, we would have money to do things like releasing teachers, right? It is challenging when the funding's not there to get those assessments done. I slightly asked the question as well, but has there been more testing of kids younger? Like what, do you have any insight into where those numbers are coming from? And is it across the province or is it in Chilliwack specifically?
Do you want to start, Dave?
You can go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex, I think it's multi-layered. So with respect to access to assessments, I can also share that we did have a concentrated effort with respect to contracting out some psych ed assessments in the last 2 years, a really focused effort. So that may have also contributed to the increase in category applications that we've seen. Dave,
And I would just add, I think even within the community, I think people are getting caught up after COVID. So
Yes.
kids that had been sitting off, parents were
Yeah.
waiting, were able to get in and get some assessments, and that's, and of course, kids coming into our community as well.
So just, oh, sorry, could you push your button? So just to clarify, there's a little bit of a bump where there may have been a delay getting some, and then all of a sudden, all of them after COVID got. So there's like maybe an under-reporting 2 years ago, and then partly.
I think it's a
And as Mrs. Jordan mentioned, we put a substantial amount of one-time funding to get through a backlog of students who required testing, but we hadn't got to them. So we did a lot of assessments in the last 18 months. Yeah.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Anybody else from the public want to ask a question? Sure. All right, seeing nobody else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.